Thank you for joining us for this National Forum on Demonstrating Care for Black Employees. I'm Sean Harper. I'm a Provost Professor in the Marshall School of Business and the Rasier School of Education at the University of Southern California, where I hold the Clifford and Betty Allen Chair in Urban Leadership. I also am founder and executive director of the USC Race and Equity Center. For nearly a decade, our center has aimed to dismantle racism, white supremacy, and anti-Blackness in all their forms. Clearly, we still have much work remaining to do. Our work spans three areas: K-12 schools and districts, colleges and universities, and businesses and firms. Today's experience is mostly situated in that third area of work for us, businesses and firms. My colleague, Richard Nassar, our center's chief strategy officer, and I yesterday decided that we wanted to do something to join the movement that's happening nationally to protest the police killings of unarmed Black people. But we also wanted to do something to be helpful to employees in companies and firms. As you might imagine, given the work that we do at the USC Race and Equity Center, many executives and managers and leaders and employees from a multitude of sectors have reached out to us for guidance. More than 5,000 people registered for our forum this afternoon, which is a strong signal of its importance and a strong signal of people's need for guidance in this moment. I'm hoping that the insights that we offer to you today will be helpful. When Richard and I rapidly pulled this together yesterday, we had but two goals. One was to create an affirming space for Black employees across a multitude of sectors. And another was to provide a space for their white colleagues and their colleagues from other racial and ethnic groups to hear firsthand from Black professionals ways that they can be important, not only in this moment of protest of the murders of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Ahmaud Arbery, but beyond this moment, tomorrow, next week, next year, and many years beyond. So we're hoping that today's National Forum gives you some guidance on not only how to be a good colleague and a good leader and a good supporter of your Black colleagues right now, but also for many years into the future. Please note that today's event is being closed captioned. You can access the captioning at the bottom of the screen. It will also be posted to YouTube, to the center's YouTube channel, the USC Race and Equity Center YouTube channel, within 2 hours following the forum. One last thing that I will say before we get started is that we're not going to talk at you for 2 hours or 90 minutes rather, but instead we've created an opportunity for you to be in dialogue with the panelists that we have recruited for today's event. You can do that by typing your questions for the panelists into the chat window here on Zoom. But you can also tweet your questions to us at USC Race Equity using the hashtag Black Employees. Again, USC Race Equity on Twitter, or you could just simply use the hashtag Black Employees. And occasionally I will call on my colleagues, Brandy Junius, Wilman Christian, James Bridgeforth, Jamin Ortega, and Richard Nassar from the USC Race and Equity Center to pose your questions to our panelists. So do feel free to send your questions to us. Before we get started, I would like to invite your participation in a poll that we've created for today's experience. The poll question is, Black employees experience racism in my workplace. Why don't you take a moment and submit your responses, and I will share with you the results. Okay, maybe we'll give this another 20 seconds. Okay, thank you. I will share with you the results once we get into our conversation. At this time, let me give you a sense of the format here. I will introduce each of our four panelists one at a time. Each of them will make a brief opening statement. After that, I will pose to them three questions, maybe four, definitely no more than four questions. And then we'll open it up for your questions. But again, don't feel like you have to wait until we get to the open Q&A part of this experience. If there are questions that are top of mind for you now, you can tweet them to us using hashtag Black Employees or put them in the chat here in Zoom. Okay, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Angelique Mills-Wilkes, who is Senior Director of Marketing Finance at ViacomCBS. Angelique.
Thanks, Sean. So again, my name is Angelique Mills-Wilkes. First and foremost, I just want to say thank you to Rich and to you, Sean, for putting this together. The past week or so has just been so emotionally overwhelming, I'm sure, for all of us. So thank you for creating the space for us to be able to come together and share this dialogue and hopefully talk through some of these issues. As far as me personally, I am a wife. I'm married to a wonderful man named Bedell. I have a 2-year-old little girl named Cadence. And professionally, this year actually marks 20 years that I've been in corporate America. I attended Hampton University. I graduated in May of 2000. Shortly after then, I started my career in public accounting as an auditor for KPMG. I am a CPA. For the past 12 years, I've been employed by what's now ViacomCBS because we recently merged. And currently my position is Senior Director of Marketing Finance. So what that essentially means is that I am fiscally responsible for the marketing budgets of many brands that we all know and love, such as BET, MTV, VH1, and so many others. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me. I just want to say thank you, and I'm really happy to be here.
Great. Thank you so much, Angelique, for joining us. We look forward to engaging in a productive, really helpful conversation with you and the others. Our second panelist is Kareem Edwards. Kareem is partner lead at Google. Kareem?
Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. My name again is Kareem Edwards. And to be honest, 2020 has been a tough year due to COVID. I have lost 3 family members, my grandmother, my cousin, and my uncle. And I just want to make sure that everyone out there, particularly the Black viewers, participants, know that I see you, I feel your pain, and I love you. And I'm a strong believer that racism is not our problem to solve. So I pray that you have the strength and the space to heal and cope during this time. And I look forward to the conversation. Professionally, as Sean mentioned, I work at Google as a partner lead. So I work with C-suite advertisers to help achieve their marketing and business objectives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kareem. We appreciate you being here. There are lots of people who are typing into the chat their condolences for your losses. I certainly join them in those expressions. Thank you for being here, especially at this time. Our third panelist is Dua Muhammad, who is an associate in the Financial Markets Advisory Group at BlackRock. Dua?
Hi, Sean. Thank you and Rich and all the organizers for having me and for holding space for Black professionals to connect during this time. As Sean mentioned, my name is Dua Muhammad. I identify as a Black Muslim woman. I grew up in Chicago and went to college at the University of Chicago and currently reside in Brooklyn, New York. I work for BlackRock and their financial markets advisory group. But aside from my background, I think, it's important to mention here that the death of George Floyd is not an isolated incident, right? And one of my colleagues framed this in an interesting way, heartbreaking really, but over the last month alone, we've witnessed and been aware of 3 different forms of racism, right? We've seen overt racism in the case of Ahmaud Arbery being hunted in South Georgia. We've seen systematic racism with George Floyd being killed in police brutality. And we've seen examples of postmodern racism with Amy Cooper in the Central Park incident. And for me personally, the example of Amy Cooper hits really close to home because Amy Cooper is part of my industry. But it does feel like we have reached some kind of inflection point over the last week or over the past few days. And as highlighted by Obama in yesterday's Obama Foundation town hall, there's something about this national response that feels different. And so I and so many other of my colleagues feel this amazing sense of hope. And so a question that we do want to address today is, how do we make this a sustainable effort? Thanks, Sean.
Thank you so much, Daw. I really appreciate you being here. And I also appreciate you placing the murder of George Floyd in a larger social context. I'm hoping that we can connect those dots to, other manifestations of structural racism in this conversation as you've invited us to do. Thank you. Our last panelist is a very dear, close personal friend whom I've known for 26 years. We were best friends in college. She is now head of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Mailchimp, Sharika Nelson.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here, and thank you again to Richard and Sean, I immediately want to say Harper, for pulling together this conversation. And as we've all talked about, we are experiencing a pandemic within a pandemic. I am originally from South Georgia and grew up near the Albany, Georgia area, which you've heard in the news has been extremely hard hit, particularly because 70% of the population there is Black. And then we lift up and we are facing forms of racism that are not new to us. And in this moment, I am cautiously optimistic and timidly hopeful, because this is not new for us as a community. I have been working in this space for close to 20 years. And the conversations that we are having this week, and the reality are the same conversations I had 2 weeks ago, 6 months ago, and almost now 20 years ago. But I'm excited for this space and this conversation, for us to think about our collective voice as a people, our collective voice as a people within corporate America, how we really turn these moments into a sustainable movement for change and for impact, so that the next time we have these horrific incidents happen, because the reality is they may continue to happen, we are not starting again, we are continuing the work from today.
Thank you so much, Sharika. It means the world to me that you are here. And of course, you were as eloquent and brilliant as you always are, as I've always known you to be. Okay, without further ado, I want to jump into posing some questions for our panel. This forum is on demonstrating care for Black employees this week and beyond. But why don't we start with self-care, the most important act of care. Can you all talk about some ways that you have deliberately exercised acts of self-care this week?
Well, I'll speak. Personally, it's been a challenge. I think we are so consumed with what's happening and wanting to have a voice and wanting to contribute to the conversation and to keep the conversation going, that it's been really difficult to take a step back and kind of care about ourselves. I participated in the Blackout Tuesday that my company also offered to us. So that was a day where I didn't work at all. But I was still very much engaged. I was still very much contributing to the conversation. But it did feel good to not have something sort of on my back or in the back of my mind that, oh, I have to do this, I have to do that. So what it allowed for me to do was to just really focus on how I was feeling, to really connect with my family and friends and share our stories. So I guess that was a nice reprieve maybe in not having to work that day, but it is very difficult in this time to really, focus on your mental health or really think about how all of this is impacting you.
Great. Thank you, Angelique.
Yeah,
Other
for
access
me,
to care? Yeah, Kareem.
yeah. So my spouse and I have a 21-month-old daughter, and I found peace just taking her on daily walks, especially now that, we'll read a book and then we'll go to a park and she'll see a butterfly and point to it and like butterfly. And that's just brought a lot of peace to me. Second, I've been increasing the amount of time I've been spending meditating using an app called Headspace just to kind of find center and peace. And then last but not least, my spouse and I just kind of watched Netflix and drank some wine, almost like it was a date night, and just kind of unwind from some of the madness outside of our house.
Great. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and jump in here. So I think with us being home and, with so many of us still very much under quarantine, right? There's been this continuous consumption of information, of videos, media. I look at my phone, there's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Wall Street Journal articles. You turn up and the TV is on and you're seeing CNN and so many other news outlets, right? And I think it's been really important, and I've had to be really intentional about just unplugging from all kinds of media outlets, and just taking the time that I need to recuperate and just do some self-reflection, right? There's a lot going on, and I think it's really important for us to be intentional about just taking a break and making sure that, we're okay with everything that we're consuming, or maybe if we're not okay, we're honoring our feelings here, right? And I think another thing that's been really useful for me is, if I do decide to get back on my phone or I want to be intentional about self-care and connecting in that way, trying to consume like Black art and celebrate Black joy, right? Whether it's listening to your favorite Black artists or looking at some art or literature by people of color, by Black people specifically. I think that's helped, recenter my thoughts and remind me of how proud I am to be a Black woman.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much. Sharika,
Um,
have you been taking care of yourself?
I have not, and I'll be very transparent with that. I have been struggling the past couple of days and weeks, and I think for me it's a duality of the lived experience that I am having as a Black woman, and the fact that the space of work, my focus area in diversity, equity, and inclusion is all around giving voice to the voiceless. And in moments where I am feeling a part of that voiceless community, it's been a challenge. So what I have primarily had to do the last couple of days is take off my Wonder Woman cape and come to a bit of okayness with not being okay. And that is hard, particularly as I'll speak from my lens as a Black woman. That is challenging to do. So that's been the first thing that's been laid bare for me in this moment, being okay with not being okay. And then secondly, my sort of cores are faith, family, and friends. So leaning on those pillars, I have been leaning hard on those pillars, and using those moments and those ripples of joy that you get from connecting with your friends and with your family, to give me that energy and strength to continue to show up the next day. But it's a day by day thing.
Thank you, Sharika. I mentioned that nearly 5,000 people registered for this event. I am presuming that some of them are white. Lots of white people want to know how they can demonstrate care for their Black colleagues in this moment of national crisis. What can you tell them?
I'll jump in on that one. When I saw the question here on the list, one of the things I talked about when we first started, Shauna and fellow panelists, is I am cautiously optimistic in this moment, right? And the reason why I'm cautiously optimistic is because history has taught me to be cautious, right? And in the conversations that I've been having, articles that I've written this week, sort of the hashtag that I'm using is hashtag prove me wrong. And what I mean by that is the energy that our white colleagues and allies are showing up with today. I need that same energy 1 week, 1 month, 1 year from now, because the challenges we are trying to dismantle are systemic. We are trying to, in essence, reprogram the consciousness of this nation. And that does not happen by accident. It does not happen overnight. So that's been my biggest piece of advice. Prove me wrong. Be consistent, be deliberate, use your power, your privilege, and your position to drive for impact. What we don't need is more pity. We need action.
You know,
Yeah, to piggyback off that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, too bad we've already established a hashtag for this event, Black employees. Otherwise, I would suggest that the hashtag really should be prove me wrong. That was really powerful, Sharika. Thank you.
Yeah.
Kareem?
Yeah. So when I think about my career, never once could I go to my manager or a team member and ask them, what should I do? I always had to kind of do some level of research and come with a perspective and then kind of get their feedback and insight and so on. So one thing I would say you should not do is just come to a Black person and ask them what they should do or what should I do. For me, do some research. Show that you really care and you're invested. There's tons of information online that you can at least have a starting point. And then note, even when you're doing that research, it's such a privilege that you can learn about racism through watching videos or reading articles. While I would assume majority, if not many of us, Black people, learn about racism through research, journals, videos, but also by experiencing it. So do the research, but then come with some sort of point of view of what you're going to do to have that conversation. And to their earlier comment, and make sure it's not today only, but tomorrow and months and years down the line as well. The last thing I would say, if you have kids, have conversation with your kids and talk to them about what's happening. So you're raising kids who are mindful of all the injustice that's happening in the world.
Thank you, Kareem. Those were really useful insights. Any other advice for white people?
Yeah, thanks, Kareem. I'll jump right in there. And that's actually the same point that I wanted to make. So on Monday, me and my manager got on a call, and it was supposed to be a regular check-in, performance and whatnot. But he was like, I don't want to talk about that because I know none of us are thinking about that right now. So let's address the elephants in the room, right? And he asked me what he can do for me to be supportive during this time in case there is anything that he can do that no one else can do, which I appreciated. But even more than that, he was like, listen, Dua, I am not only going to ask you what I can do, but I'm going to be proactive in doing my own research on how I can support you during this time and be an ally. And to me, that meant so much because he's taking it upon himself to learn how he can be supportive of me, of other Black colleagues throughout the firm, and of other Black friends that he has outside of work, you know? And I think what's important to echo right now to our colleagues, to our managers, to everybody, is the fact that not being racist is no longer enough right now, right? Like, we need people to be actively anti-racist. And if you don't know what that means, there are so many resources that we can look up to help you understand what it means to be anti-racist, right? There's How to Be an Anti-Racist. It's a book by Dr. Abraham Kendi. There's the anti-racismproject.org. And so many other resources that you can find online, books and literature on what that means. And thirdly, I'd like to say that our Black Professionals Network has put together an extensive document pulling together so many resources on how you can support your Black colleagues during this time. And so, I know that's being distributed throughout organizations. And if you're a Black person who would like to get a hold of that, reach out to your Black Professionals Network at work. And if you don't feel like that's something that you want to do, then maybe advise for your colleagues to do that.
Great. Thanks so much, Dua. Angelique, any advice?
Yeah, I would just like to add that in this moment, because I think that as Black professionals, we've been we move through corporate America being so conscious of how we make others, being white people, how we make them feel, and so conscious of not making them feel uncomfortable. One thing I would say is for our white colleagues to really be courageous in this moment, because even with everything going on, I've tried to put, and I think this is also what I've sort of been taught, how to act in corporate America, but I try to put myself in the shoes of my white colleagues and what they must be feeling now, because they too are overwhelmed with information and hashtags and videos and so on and so forth. So when I think about that, how they must be feeling, I'm sure that there's some hesitation on their part as well to speak up for fear of maybe what their friends or their family members might say. But what I would say in this moment is to do it anyway. Be courageous anyway, speak up anyway. If you see acts of injustice in the workplace, speak up on behalf of a Black person. Don't be afraid to go to someone and say, you know what, I think this person is being treated unfairly, because honestly, that's what it's gonna take to move the needle. We've done so many things in the past. We started these, Black forum groups, and I mean, there's a lot being done, but nothing that's been done so far has been impactful. And I think right now is a time for people to be bold, for changes to be radical, in order for change to really happen. So I would just encourage even, my white colleagues just to be fearless in speaking up, use your voice. It is so powerful. And that's what we need right now.
Yeah, thank you. That was really, really helpful. Rich and I, as I mentioned at the top of our time here together today, we got a lot of outreach from white executives and team leaders asking for advice. But we also got a lot of outreach earlier this week from Black professionals saying, white people are getting this all wrong in my company. Can you help? So I can't resist asking the panelists, what should white people not do for the rest of this week or ever?
I mean, that's such a loaded question, honestly. I mean, I think the point is, I mean, there are explicit right and wrongs, right? You have common sense, so you know what not to do. But I think in a moment like this, there's a high sensitivity. I would just say, just take a step back, hold yourself accountable, have real conversations with yourself. Maybe you don't want to voice this, but sit back and think and really try to understand what's going on. And I think that if you do that in your own time and are truly honest with yourself, then you'll know how to move. You'll know how to navigate these situations. I mean, even though white people are not, susceptible to what we're experiencing, they're human. People know right from wrong. People really truly know what to say and what not to say. It's just that they've been given so many liberties to say exactly what they wanted to say. So I think if people just took the time to be human, humanize the conversation, humanize your feelings, I think that you'll find the right words to say.
Hey, I'm going to jump right in here. I think one thing that everybody needs to be careful about and make sure they don't say right now is the All Lives Matter hashtag or phrase, right? Nobody wants to hear that right now. And if you want to talk about lives that matter, let's focus the attention on the Black Lives Matter movement. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, if the first stance you're going to take is condemning the looting, then your Black colleagues don't want to hear from you, right? And when that does happen, I think it's important for all of us to recenter the conversation to the underlying problem at hand, which is racial inequality and the treatment of Black people in this country and abroad.
Thank you.
I'll plus one to both comments. And I think about the do not do, and I like the way you phrased it, Sean, for not only for this week, but ever. In relationships, the point that was brought up earlier around the doing, which was the research, own your own journey. So I think in this moment, not expecting your Black coworkers, employees to relive their trauma for your benefit, right? To not expect us to want to sit and tell stories of how we have experienced various forms of racism solely for the point of storytelling in a space for your comfort. I just have to underscore the importance of doing your own research and owning your own journey in this space. And I think the other thing is that do not assume that this is business as usual, right? And by that, I mean giving grace in this moment around work product, around productivity. I love the fact, Angela, you talked about your organization shut down for a day and that freed up space for you mentally to refocus. As people are asking me about deadlines and such this week, I'm very real this week in saying this is not the week for that, right? So I think those would be the 2 points that I would add around what not to do today or tomorrow.
Great, thanks, Sharika. Got anything, Kareem?
For me, yeah, it may be obvious or it may not be, but do not vote for Trump. That would be my main thing.
Thank you all. That was really helpful. I'll add just 2 more things that I've been hearing from Black professionals who've reached out to us this week. One of them is that their well-intended leaders have come to them and given them additional labor. Could you help organize a conversation for the company? We want to hear about the Black experience. We want to hear what Black people are feeling right now in this moment of outrage and grief. That for many Black professionals is not the kind of labor that we want to take on at this time.
Correct.
Another has been, strangely, white people speaking to their Black colleagues for the very first time. Many Black professionals have talked with us this week about how they've just gotten so many phone calls and text messages and messages through the employee communication channels from white people who've never said a word to them, inquiring about their well-being. How are you doing? How are you feeling? This is so awful. On the one hand, they appreciate the compassion and the act of kindness. But on the other hand, it's rather offensive because we're not in a relationship. We've had an opportunity to be in relationship in this workplace setting previously, prior to this moment. But, it just doesn't feel all that genuine when someone's coming for the first time. I talked with a colleague whose CEO decided to call as many Black employees as possible. Again, that seems like a really good gesture, but it left this particular Black professional wondering, am I ever going to hear from my CEO again? And more importantly, are there other ways that my CEO beyond this moment is going to demonstrate for me and for my Black colleagues that Black lives do in fact matter, to him, her, or them, and also to our larger workplace. So those are just some additional things that I've been hearing about this week. Let's talk about corporate statements. There have been a lot of them this week, again, about the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. They've been so on trend this week. Panelists, from your perspectives, what makes a statement good and believable?
Well, like you said, there's a lot of statements. Everyone is turning their Instagrams Black. Everyone is hashtagging, Black Lives Matter. A lot of people, whether it was day 2, 3, 4, 5, because a lot of people actually didn't come out and you were actually looking for people to stand up and make a statement. I'm going to be honest and say that that's great. I do want to hear these statements. I want to hear that people, are unified and that they support us and that they understand what's going on. And, but at the end of the day, I want action. Like, even if you didn't say anything, but you did something, that means way more to me than just making a statement. So I just think if you're gonna make a statement, let it be clear, let it be definitive. Don't let it be vague and, we know that everyone's having a tough time right now. No, Black people are really having a really, really, really difficult time right now. Be explicit. Don't be afraid to call it what it is. So when I look for statements, that's what I'm looking to see, because the generalization, the glossing over what's really going on, you might as well just not have even said anything. But along with your impactful statements, I want to see change. I want to know what you plan to do. Don't just make a statement. Tell me what you're doing or what you plan to do. That's what I'm looking to see right now.
Thanks, Angelique.
Thanks, Angelique. I'll hop in here as well. I think it's really important to make sure that you're addressing the elephants in the room, right? The stance that you take must be clear, and it must be clearly condemning racism towards Black people. So like Ange said, to refrain from any blanketed statements, calling this a misunderstanding or saying these are unusual times and just leaving it at that, right? Tell me why. And I think another thing that's important to include in statements, whether it's by, leadership at a firm or executives, is that, although this issue may not seem this issue can be somewhat political, but I think even more so it is a human rights issue. And I think in that sense, it's a very emotional topic. It's an emotional topic for Black people and for people who aren't Black. I think if you're making a statement, if you're saying something, it's okay to be openly vulnerable and emotional. And I feel like that will help get the message across, and people will listen when you speak from the heart. If you're going to say that you're allocating XYZ resources to help this, you have to make sure you follow up on that and execute on that, right? And the fourth thing I want to say here is making sure that you address this in a timely manner. If a company comes out with a statement 2 weeks from now, it's no longer really holding as much power as it would have, at the height of this incident.
Great, thank you, Dua. Sharika, I want to put something on this question that I know you can handle. A lot of white executives have been asking me this week specifically, should I add Black Lives Matter in my statement? Should I say it or should I not say it? What's your perspective?
Ooh, thank you, Sean. That's been a real conversation in my professional setting, right? And my voice of feedback is we have to have a certain level of credibility in this conversation. And if we have had no voice, if we have had no commitment, no tangible strategic objectives around this work, and then all of a sudden we do an Instagram post that says Black Lives Matter, and then you talk to individuals that are working in that organization and they tell you that in their day-to-day experiences, it is quite obvious that Black lives do not matter to that organization, to that leadership. That is as bad as saying nothing, right? So ensuring that you have a certain level of credibility is going to be key as an organization starts to frame up its message and the usage of Black Lives Matter, and being sure that you have people at the table who are crafting those messages in your brand team, your marketing team, your corporate communications organization that reflect our culture, can reflect our voice. That's critical in ensuring that you are framing up the right conversation. And also, I think going a step further and having deliberate interaction with organizations and associations, movements, social justice firms that are doing the actual work. So again, that you have a basis of understanding before you just go with an Instagram post has been key. and the advice that I have been giving.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Sharika. You know, one thing that your reflection makes me think about is that the communications area in most companies and firms tends to lack diversity, like in a major way. So we're talking marketing, strategic communications, and so on. It is important for executives and leaders to actually talk to Black people, to get Black people's perspectives before putting out these statements and Instagram posts and all of these things, right? Because if you're only getting your advice and intel from a mostly white communications department, they may not understand how a message is likely to land on Black communities. But your Black employees certainly would have, you know, a much better understanding. And, you know, frankly, I liked your point too, Sharika, about credibility. It is your Black employees who can actually help the company be much more credible in its communication.
Can I add a plus to that too, Sean? Completely agree, you know, plus 100 to that. But also, I'd take that even a step further, that it's not just critical for C-suite or for executive leadership to ensure that they are talking to their Black employees and that their professional connections are representative. It's also important in their personal connections that they are diverse and they are representative, so that they are hearing stories from individuals. My storytelling may have a certain flavor because it's tied to my paycheck. So the story that I give you as an employee of your organization, right? There may be a little bit of sugarcoating going into that storytelling, but I encourage my senior leaders I partner with that when they think about their personal journey, it's not just talking to the Black employees, but when you think about your wedding invitation list, or you think about who you're calling, you know, on the weekends to play tennis with, to play golf with, to grab a cup of coffee, what do those people look like? What are the communities that they are representing, the voices that they can share with you? So I challenge us to go a step further. It's not just about the professional and talking to people that have a financial tie to you, but you need to get out and do the work to engage and build relationship and credibility from a personal standpoint, because you're bringing your whole self as you're making those business decisions for that organization.
That's right.
Yeah. And Sean, if I may add, one thing I struggle with some of the statements is that when COVID started to increase in the US, you saw retailers put some kind of messaging on their homepage, whether that means like, hey, we care about you, or simply, we're going to have delayed shipping because of COVID. Something was on there, and it's probably still on their homepage. I struggle with companies making statements and putting on social media that will disappear in a day or two and not on their homepage, because your homepage essentially is like your storefront. So if you have a statement, that's where you want to put it, because where every consumer could see it. And then you're kind of making a bold statement, wherever that may be. So I have struggled with a lot of companies, but one company who I think has done it right and has always done it right, and in my opinion, is about that life, is Ben & Jerry. Their statement is very direct. It tells you what they want. Their executive board is diverse when it comes to gender and race, and they always lead with empathy and passion.
Yeah, we're gonna have to plus one to the Ben & Jerry's comment, right? Because these 50,000 foot level commitments that we are seeing from a lot of organizations, that's not the energy that we need, right? And I think Ange made the point earlier about just the transparency in the messaging, right? And I don't think in this moment, it's not about getting it perfect the very first time. It's about being present and being consistent in that presence, right? And having the vulnerability to say that we're figuring this out, right? But what we are doing is being committed to moving from the place where we currently are to a space of better.
Absolutely. Okay, I have just one more question for the panelists before we open it up for questions from the folks who are joining us virtually. Again, if you have not submitted your questions, you can certainly do so in the Zoom chat window, or you can tweet them to us using hashtag Black employees. Okay, last question here. Black professionals have the attention of executives and managers right now. How might we sustain their care for Black employees long after the protest end?
I don't know if this is directly answering that question, but there's something that I kind of just want to say. Again, I am obviously a Black professional. This marks 20 years that I've been in corporate America. And I just want to convey a message, because I think that, you know, a lot of white people, obviously they're not in our shoes. They don't know how I feel. So they look to us to explain to them exactly how we feel and what we're thinking. So I kind of just want to put this out there. For the 20 years that I've been working, I've never felt completely safe in a corporate setting, regardless of how many times I've been promoted, how many white allies I have at work, so on and so forth. I've never felt completely safe. And it's also a bit of a mind trip, because at home, okay, our Black sisters and brothers, we are that Black queen. We are respected, we are valued, we are everything, okay? And then at work, we're here and they're there. So that is really a mind trip. It's really something that over the course of 20 years that I've struggled with. But because we are tasked with living with it, with coping, with assimilating, with trying to figure out a way, we just do it day to day. But it's a real thing. I just really want to convey the message to corporations, to our white colleagues, that we might look okay. We might look as if, you know, we're here, we're doing the job, we're just like you, we're one and the same. But no, there is this undercurrent of this feeling that we are not you, that we are not valued, that regardless of what presentation we give, you know, what work we produce, that we're never on the same level. And again, it's really a mind trip, because again, at home, we're on a pillar. We're amazing. We're loved. And to that point, I just want to say another thing. And again, I'm not sure that I'm answering the question, but I don't want to forget this later. Don't look at our non-participation in sort of extracurricular activities as us being standoffish, or, you know, we're not team players. How many times have we been asked to attend this happy hour or this bowling event or this after work thing? And I just want to say that the reason why we might have apprehension, or maybe sometimes we're not present, is because, you know, we have a job to do. We come to work, we do that job. Going home is our reprieve. Going home to the people that love us, that honor us, that cherish us, that's our way out. So we almost have to go home so that we can replenish and reset and fill the tank up, so that we can come to work the next day and deal and cope and perform and be present. So I just want to put that out there, that this is something that I know for me, I'm speaking personally, but I know that others might feel this as well, that we look okay and we show up and we're there, and, you know, you might think that everything is okay, but really this is something that I've lived with for 20 years. It's never escaped me. Some days it might be worse than others. Some days it might be more obvious than others, depending on what's going on in our society. But I just want to relay this message, that just to try to help you understand us, that this is what we feel day in and day out. I don't even remember what the question was, but I kind of just wanted to say that, so.
Your response to it was brilliant, Angelique. It was so insightful. It's so consistent with what I hear time and time again from Black employees in my own research. And, you know, much of what you said resonates even with my own experience as being a Black professional working in higher education for 2 decades. So thank you. Any other insights on how we might keep Black folk at the top of the agenda and not lose the attention of executives that we have right now?
Sure. First, thank you, Ange, for sharing that. I think, you know, I'm sure that took a lot of courage and bravery on your end, and it's not easy to have those conversations, just to be so open about that, you know, so thank you. And to your point, Sean, while we do have the attention of executives and managers right now, MLK said this at the March on Washington, and he highlighted a fierce urgency of now, right? So we have to strike while the iron's hot. We need companies to commit to doing something not only now, but in the future. Whether it be donating money towards sustaining racial equity initiatives or committing to inclusion and diversity initiatives at their respective organizations, right? It's important for, I would say, people of color to connect with other people of color and to make sure that you voice your specific needs or the specific needs of Black employees within your organization and how people can help you during this time, right? Make sure you try to be as targeted as you can in that response. And lastly, I think it's really great that we're having these conversations in the workplace, but what we also want is for our colleagues to go ahead and internalize what they hear in the workplace and take it back home, share it with his or her wife, share it with her kids, and teach your kids what it means or know what it means to raise anti-racist children, right? Because that's ultimately getting to the root of the problem. And that's how we begin to address like generational racism.
Great, thank you, Dua.
Yeah, I think one small thing, at Google, we have increasingly add DE&I into our meetings. So whether that's our team meeting, our all hands, it's added. And then one thing we have recently done is make sure DE&I, that agenda item, is at the beginning of the meeting, because often when we have it at the end, we run out of time. And I think what that has allowed employees and leadership is to get comfortable being uncomfortable with having a conversation about any kind of ism that may exist within the company or outside the company as well. Second, I think it's important to make sure that your executive team looks like the world, right? So for me, when I look within Google higher ranks, I don't see anyone who looks like me. So often it's a challenge, like, is it possible for me to climb this corporate ladder and really become a SVP? And I struggle with that if I don't see it, because seeing it is believing.
Right.
Yeah, Kareem, that's a really important acknowledgement. And unfortunately, it is not a problem that is specific to Google. In just about every industry in the American economy, there's tremendous racial stratification in the workplace. People of color broadly, and Black people more specifically, tend to be in the lowest paid roles, the roles that are at the lowest level in the organization, administrative assistant roles, custodial roles. Now, to be sure, the people who do that work are absolutely deserving of our respect and our appreciation for their humanity and for their professionalism. But what I'm saying, right, is the point that you made, that when we look at, team leaders and directors and vice presidents and SVPs and CEOs, there tends to be, a tragic shortage of Black people. If you really want to convey that Black Lives Matter, don't just write it in a statement. Promote some Black people to senior leadership. Give them some power or a share of the power. Give them the resources that are needed to help the company make good on its espoused commitments to equity, diversity, and inclusion. I just think that's such an important thing that companies and firms can do. It's perhaps one of the most powerful levers, as a matter of fact. If you really want to make Black people feel affirmed and you really want to convey that Black Lives Matter, promote Black people. Sharika, anything?
Sean, that's exactly the point I was going to make around dismantling internal systems that allow us to not focus on ensuring that we have adequate succession planning, sponsorship programs, that we are creating really access for Black employees within organizations, that when you are building your recruiting and hiring strategies, that the conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, whatever you call it in your organization, is woven into the DNA of your strategies, that it's not an afterthought. and that you have very clear expectations on not only the recruiting parts of the organization, but those business decision makers, your hiring managers who are really bringing in talent into the organization. I think as a collective voice, we need to be sure that we are applying the right pressure to force organizations to take a look at, their boards of directors as well, because that's an influential part of an organization's sort of business goal development. And I would be remiss if I did not say that put the money behind the talk, right? When I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion departments, a lot of my peers have had their budgets downsized or stripped over the past couple of months. Put the resources, whether they be dollars, whether they be headcount, so that teams that are focused on this work can really drive change and can drive an impact within an organization. I think the third thing that we can do as a collective voice is to ensure that this conversation around DE&I is part of the business goals and business objectives, and thinking about interweaving a conversation into product conversations and making sure that we are tying the evolution of our organizations and ensuring that the needs of the Black community are represented in those products, the evolutions. We know that tech can be an equalizer, but if our voice is not showing up in the development of technology, if we're not showing up in the positions technology, we will continue to be left behind. So I think those are probably three things that I would add.
Great. Thank you all. I really appreciate it. We have just under a half hour left. We want to open this up for some more engagement or a different kind of engagement with our audience. So at this time, I'm going to turn to my colleagues from the USC Race and Equity Center, who have been very carefully reading all of your comments and questions in the chat function and via Twitter. It's not too late to submit a question. Again, you can do so using the chat function or using the hashtag Black employees. Why don't we start with Jamin, who has a question that's come in for the panel via Twitter. Jamin?
Thank you, Dr. Harper. The question from Twitter comes from Sean. As the only Black person on my team, how would you start the conversation when your coworkers haven't reached out?
Great. Why don't we have two panelists weigh in on that question? You're the only Black person. Yeah, jump in on that one. It's a good one.
Okay, I'll take the question. So I've been the only Black person on my team in various functions throughout my career, so I know exactly how that is. First and foremost, I just want to relay that you're not alone. Even now, what's going on and at the height of everything, I find myself looking at maybe white coworkers that I'm friends with on Instagram or whatever, just to see how they're responding or if they're saying anything. I'm kind of trolling people who haven't reached out, and I'm not gonna lie, that also doesn't like play a part in my mind. And I'm just like, okay, I think I see where you stand. But what I would say is that first and foremost, not everyone knows how to articulate themselves in a situation. A lot of people are looking for us to kind of guide them. So they kind of just err on the side of caution, and they're just like, well, I don't really know what to say. If it's on your heart and it's bothering you and it's something that you're really seeking, I would just say, be bold. Come out, ask someone, what do you feel about this? That's kind of what I've been doing throughout this time. Again, along to the earlier point that Kareem made about certain companies with the COVID-19, having messaging about that on their websites. And even my daughter's daycare, they sent out a note about, we know that a lot's going on with COVID-19, but she didn't say anything about what's going on with Black people. So I trolled her. I responded like, okay, that's great, but what are you doing about what's going on with Black people? And I just think that now's the time to not be passive. Now is the time to speak up. Now is the time to not mute your voice. Say how you feel. I mean, honestly, people, what do we have to lose? And this moment is one that we should take advantage of. as Sharika also said earlier, keep that same energy, both for us as Black people, and we're looking for that as from white people as well. But you know, to answer your question, ask him. Just come out and ask him how he feels about it. That's really the only way you're gonna know.
Yeah, great, very helpful, Angelique. Actually, I thought that was a really complete response. Let's go to another question. Brandy has a question that has come in for our panelists. Brandy?
Hi, yes. Someone's question here is, does anyone see companies that have good examples of paid time off policies that would allow or encourage folks to call out Black, so to speak?
Yeah, I would say at Google, we've been fortunate. They released a new program called Care Program, where just because of COVID and what's happening, that you could essentially take like parental leave during this time, whether that's part-time or full-time, which I have taken and still am taking just because everything that's happening, and even from the fact that I am homeschooling my daughter now. So I'm grateful for that. So they have offer 12 to 14 weeks of paid time off.
Great. Kareem, could you take a minute to explain what calling out Black means? I bet that there might be some in our viewing audience who haven't heard that term.
Yeah, I'll tell you how I define it. There's certain days when I am just so mentally and even physically drained from essentially existing in this world due to all the isms and unconscious biases that happen for being Black. So when I go into the office, and I'll give an example, on Monday, coming after the weekend, after all the protests, we had our team meeting, and we typically go around and kind of share a high and a low. And then someone kicked off and just kind of explained how they had such a wonderful weekend. And it just caught me off guard that anyone could have a wonderful weekend after a weekend of protests across the country.
Yes.
And I was so taken aback that I verbally expressed how, well, I had the opposite weekend. It was the worst weekend, arguably, of my life, definitely of 2020. And after that, I just checked out. I called out like, listen, I'm done. I can't do this anymore, because I was mentally and physically drained from knowing that someone could have a great weekend, people literally dying at the hands of officers and then fighting for life and hope. So for me, calling out Black is just that time to focus on myself and not have to deal with indirect or direct racism.
Yeah. Thank you, Kareem. That was one of the things, the experience that you had on Monday, just know that you definitely were not alone in that experience, is one that we were hearing from lots of Black professionals who were reaching out to us, that their colleagues in their Monday morning meetings were like, happy Monday. And the one Black person on the team was like, you've got to be kidding me. Really, like, this is not a happy Monday. Good. Let's go to Rich, who has a question for Dua.
Thanks, Sean. This question comes from an earlier comment that Dua made when she referenced 3 forms of racism. And Tiffany and Nicholas asked this question in our Zoom chat. And they asked if you could further outline the concept of postmodern racism. And if you just recap the forms that you spoke of earlier.
Yeah, so I'll start off by recapping the forms of racism that I highlighted earlier. So we've seen overt racism, right? In the case of Ahmaud Arbery, who was killed in South Georgia as he was going out for a jog, right? They thought he may have been, so they say, they thought he may have been the person who broke into their homes and went ahead and just took liberty or took justice into their own hands and shot him. And we've all seen the video, unfortunately, being circulated. There's forms of systemic racism in the case of George Floyd, where he was killed in the hands of police brutality. And we've also seen that. And then postmodern racism, which is the question that's been asked, Amy Cooper with the Central Park incident. So what does postmodern racism mean? To me, it's a form of racism that's less overt. It's implicit. It's you thinking while you're looking at me, thinking that you're better than me or more educated than I am because I am Black, thinking that, you know, you own some kind of privilege that I don't because of the color of your skin versus mine. You know, if you're going through a resume or a pile of resumes, picking or not picking names of candidates or resumes of candidates that sound Black, right? Like these are all choices that we make that may not necessarily be as direct, but these are informed by racism ultimately. You know, those to me are all examples of postmodern racism, just not being as explicit.
Great, thank you, Dua. Wilman has a question that's come in for our panelists.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. This question is directed to all the panelists. The person here states, there's a fear that after the current conversation, those who are speaking up and standing up are very likely to be blackballed by corporations from jobs. They know folks whose jobs were retracted when HR and those firms found out that they had spoken publicly on justice issues. The question posed here is this: what can we do to openly talk about this retaliatory practice that exists, that creates a sense of fear for standing up among people? Or excuse me, that creates a sense of fear among people and standing up for others?
Yeah, let me jump in on this one. You know, one of the—
I was ready.
Go for it, you go first.
I'll just say this. Yeah, you might be scared. I don't know all who's on this call. I have no idea. Did I think about that, you know, when I was asked to sit on this panel? Yeah, for like 2 seconds. And then I was like, I don't care. You know, I hope white companies are on this call. I hope white corporations, I hope white colleagues and people in place of leadership are on this call, because I just think that we've done so much. We've talked so much, we've protested, we've tried to map it out, you know, let you know exactly how we're feeling. And of course, I'm speaking from a personal place, but I'm at the point where I even feel like I would have done this call 6 months ago, you know, for fear of what the backlash might be. But I've found strength. I'm now courageous. I'm eager to get my point across. I want to say what's on my mind. So I would just encourage people to be fearless and speak your truth. There's so much strength in speaking how you feel, and we've been sort of just going through life and just operating from a place of let's not disrupt anything or let's not make anyone uncomfortable. But the only way that we're really, and I'm convinced of this, the only way that we're really going to see change going forward is if we ourselves, if we take the first step and, you know, not be afraid to speak our truth. That's the only way anything's going to change.
Yeah, I just want to the speaking your truth, right? And to your point, not only speaking your truth, but speaking your truth loudly. Right. One of the best pieces of advice that I've gotten in my career is to never pass the mic on your own voice. Because if you allow other people to tell your story, they will rewrite your narrative in a way that is not going to be directed to what you need, what your expectations are, or in alignment with your value system. And the question I would ask for a person who is in this moment maybe paralyzed by that fear for organizations or future hiring opportunities is, why would you want to work for an organization or in a corporation that does not value you and the totality of who you are?
Yes, Sharika.
That's the question that I would ask. And if it comes to a case where you find organizations where that do not value you, start your own. We as a people have a strong history of entrepreneurship. There are resources there. Build our community connections as well to support each other with amazing ideas, innovative solutions. There are multiple paths that you can pursue. Never think that you have just one option.
Being the moderator is so hard because I just want to jump in and like actually be a panelist, but I'm going to be disciplined here in the time that we remain, that we have remaining, because we got a lot of questions. I just want to speak back to like so much of what you two just said that I thought was so powerful and helpful. But instead, I'm going to turn it over to James, who has a question that's been sent for Angelique.
Hi, Angelique. So as somebody who works in media, what can and should executives do right now to tangibly support Black people who are in the industry?
Right. So I would say, regardless of your industry, media or not, the message that I would want to convey is that Black executives need to, again, speak up, not be afraid of what the repercussion might be, because this is the thing, people. This is not, George Floyd wasn't the first. Ahmaud Arbery wasn't the first. Breonna Taylor wasn't the first. Like, we've been, and that has a ripple effect, right? That's obviously, unfortunately, people have lost their lives, but I'm just speaking to racism on a whole and, channeling it to the racism that exists in corporate America. Whatever we've been doing so far has not really been working. It's been like, they kind of like throw you a little bone just to kind of like pacify the current situation. But I think we need to be radical. We need to put the onus on Black execs, white execs, everyone at the top, to first acknowledge that racism is a real thing and it's still happening in 2020. And I think that for people to do that, they just have to really be willing to be honest. A lot of people go throughout their day with turning a blind eye and kind of it not being in your face. And so when it's not in your face, it's easy to gloss over and not talk about. But I would just encourage all those working in a corporation, all those reporting into white people, Black people, whatever, whoever's at the top, to apply the pressure, hold them accountable. Again, a lot of people have been hashtagging and saying that they're supporting the movement that's going on right now. Hold people accountable, have those hard conversations, be willing to make yourself uncomfortable, be willing to make them uncomfortable. That's all I really have.
Okay.
Sorry, if I could add something really quickly. I know this question wasn't addressed to me, but I think what's important is that right now, the elephant in the room is race, right? And racial inequality and what's going on outside of our professional workspaces, what's going on, in so many different cities around the US. And so I think that, even if this communication doesn't come from executives, and it's unfortunate if it doesn't, I think a lot more people would be open and receptive to having this conversation than you would think. And I know over the past couple of days, I've had colleagues who, I never thought would reach out to me during this time who have, because some might not know how to address this or might be, afraid to address it. So I think, if it means you starting off with your manager and continuing to escalate it to his or her manager and just keep going up that chain, like Ange said, speak out if it's going to come from you, and you'll be surprised as to how receptive our people are willing to be right now.
Great, thank you, Dua. Brandy has a question.
Yes, someone asked, they would like to hear comments or thoughts on the balance between white people speaking up for Black colleagues and white people taking up space that should be saved for Black voices.
Good question.
I can go here. I think it's a really delicate situation here in trying to balance those two. I think on both of our ends, whether or not this emotional labor should fall on Black people, maybe not in an ideal world, but unfortunately today, I don't think we're there yet, where this conversation will be had or initiated mostly by people who are not Black, right? And so I think it's important for us as Black people to make sure that we frame the conversations that we want to be had in our respective spaces, right? And to make sure that we engage in these conversations and list what our demands are. And I think on the other hand, it's important for allies to, one, listen if we want them to listen, and two, provide support in any way that they can. So that's my advice.
Thank you. Actually, I want to throw in a question. So far we have very much situated this conversation in a Black-white binary. In some ways, we did that because corporations and firms are just so overwhelmingly white, particularly and most especially at the highest levels of leadership. But let's have one or two panelists weigh in on ways that other people of color who are not Black can demonstrate care for Black employees at this time and beyond.
I can start with that. one thing that we've been very conscious of is the intersectionality, to your point, Sean, of the conversation, because whereas our Black African American community is at the forefront of this particular moment in time, we recognize that we have many parallel struggles and challenges with other communities. So one of the practices that we have tried to focus on is how do we ensure that we are approaching our recommendations, our strategies, our actions in a way that is inclusive, but also balancing that with ensuring that other communities are not hijacking the voice of the Black community in this moment. But the coalition of voice is important because there are strength in numbers. And while we recognize, like I said, in this moment, we're definitely focused on the Black community, our external environment could change very quickly. Our internal environment could change very quickly. And we want to make sure that the voices and the energy that we are receiving for this particular moment, as I talked about, are still there 1 year from now. To ensure that happens, that we have to bring those individuals into the conversation now. We have to bring them along for the journey. But I think what we're trying to be deliberate about is making sure we're very clear about how we establish partnership, how we establish sort of the duality of voice, but don't lose where we are focused right now. So it's more of a partnership, but we are definitely committed to keeping the importance on the Black and African American community right now. But you have to bring others along in the journey.
Thanks for such a thoughtful response, Sharika. Will somebody please tweet a good question? Jamin is getting very lonely on Twitter. Use the hashtag Black employees. While you're doing that, we'll turn to Wilman for a question that's come in via Zoom.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. I have a question here about whiteness as a cultural or professional norm. This person asks, can one of the panelists or all of the professional norm increases racial stress for racial minorities and often perpetuates racial trauma and white supremacy, especially from the Black employee perspective?
Wilman, can you read the question one more time?
Absolutely. They want to know how does whiteness as a cultural or professional norm increase racial stress for racial minorities and perpetuates racial trauma and white supremacy?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to take that one and I'm going to offer an evidence-based response, a response that emerges from my research and the research that we do at the USC Race and Equity Center. When we do climate assessments, workplace climate assessments, this whole notion of whiteness is very much embedded into the culture, the policies, the practices, and the norms of organizations. It was in just about every workplace setting, unless we're talking about, like a Black-owned business. Sharika, I so appreciated you talking about and calling for Black entrepreneurship. That was great. But unless we're talking about one of those, most companies were founded by white people and they were entirely white for a very long time. So it was white executives who determined what professionalism is in that particular context. And, their notions, their cultural notions of professionalism have not evolved as companies have become more diverse. Really whiteness is embedded really all throughout, the various activities and the day-to-day operational norms. So therefore, it does become a traumatizing experience for a person who is not white to have to come to work every day and, be excluded and be othered and reminded that your culture has no value here. That is very traumatizing. All right, it looks like Jamin got his question via Twitter. Jamin?
Yes, so this is for all panelists. For employees low in the hierarchy, what kind of strategies can we use to advocate for policy changes or equity initiatives with our executive leadership?
So what I would say to that is, number one, make sure your qualifications are intact. I just want to, in no way is this oh, let's promote Black people, let's do this without the credentials being there. So do the work, make sure that your job speaks for itself, make sure that your accolades speak for themselves. And once you've done that and you feel like maybe you have been not promoted to the level that you're supposed to be promoted, or your pay is not at the level you're supposed to be at, I would just encourage you to have that conversation. Again, this is also, I'm telling you this is my advice, but this is also something that I'm applying to myself going forward. I know my worth. I mean, I know, my professional background and history and what I've done to prove that my value is there. Now it's time for the hard questions. Be prepared to go to your boss to say, hey, I've been in this position for X amount of time. I've done, various projects, whatever you can say and can speak for why you feel like you should be recognized in a more an additional manner at your job. Be ready. Know that questions are going to come at you hard, that you're going to have to be able to substantiate what you're asking for or what you feel like you're, what's owed to you, so to speak. But I would just say be courageous and speak out. So many times within my own career, I kind of just went along and just was happy with what I was given. And knowing that my white counterparts were being promoted at an accelerated rate and that my promotion wasn't happening. And I kind of just sort of dealt with it. We learn to just deal with things. But I would just encourage you to not let that happen anymore. If you feel like you're deserving of something else, ask for it. Ask why you have not been recognized. Ask why, things may not be happening for you in the manner that you think they should be.
Great. Anybody else want to jump in on this one?
Yeah. Know the difference between your mentor and your sponsor. So for me, my mentor or mentors is someone I would go to if I want an event, but my sponsor or sponsors are people that I'm going to when I want to get promoted. And I'm very intentional about the work that I have done and share with them. So when the door is closed and I'm not at that table and they're kind of doing reviews on performance, they could advocate for all the work I have done to make sure I'm moving up within the space of, at least in this case, Google, right? So just be intentional about mentor and what you share with your mentor versus your sponsor, yeah, and vice versa.
Okay. We have just under 2 minutes remaining. I want to thank Brandy, Willman, Jamin, James, and Richard for searching for and posing really important questions to the panel. I also want to thank Angelique, Kareem, Dua, and Sharika for your brilliant insights. I am certain that the nation has benefited from what you brought to this conversation. You were bold, you were honest, you were brave, but perhaps most importantly, you were useful. You were useful to Black professionals who, really needed to hear this affirming word from each of you. But you were also useful to professionals from other racial and ethnic groups who really in their hearts want to be good colleagues to Black folks with whom they work. So, seriously, on behalf of me and my colleagues at the USC Race and Equity Center, we're all just so incredibly grateful for the generosity of your participation in this experience. At the top of our time together, I invited those who were joining us to respond to one poll question, and it was about Black people experiencing racism in their workplace settings. 77% of you believe that Black people are experiencing racism in your workplace. That's more than 3 out of 4 of you who joined us today. That is a very serious problem. One of the things that I hope that we have learned in this moment of national uprising about the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, is that this isn't just about that one act of violence, that one act of murder. It really is about a repeated pattern of neglect for criminal justice reform, a repeated pattern of disregard for Black people's lives. That happens in companies and firms as well. There's language for it. It's called spirit murdering. And there are all other kinds of acts of violence that happen for Black professionals. So, I appreciate that folks who joined us today were honest. 77% of you believe that, yeah, Black people probably are experiencing racism. You don't have to stay there, right? Reach out to us at the USC Race and Equity Center. This is what we do. Rich and I pulled this program together in a day because we wanted to be just responsive to the nation in this moment. But this doesn't have to be your last experience with us. We go to companies and firms and assess the climate of inclusion and respectability and fairness and equity for employees of color, women, LGBT employees, and so on. We also provide professional learning experiences for companies and firms. We teach people how to actually do equity, how to actually make their companies diverse and inclusive. And we also facilitate conversations for companies and firms that don't have the in-house expertise on these topics. So, again, I am so grateful, and all of us at the USC Race and Equity Center are so grateful that you took out 90 minutes to join us. But, prove us wrong. Don't let this be your last time being in touch with us for assistance. Once again, thank you for joining us, and thank you again to our panelists. Everybody, in light of everything that's going on, take the best care of yourselves that you can.